Ma'am, if you take one more step toward that courtroom, I'll have you removed in handcuffs. The words slammed through the marble hallway like a judge's gavel, loud enough to make half the people near courtroom 7B stop walking. Naomi Whitaker didn't flinch. She stood there in a charcoal wool coat, dark jeans, and low black heels, one hand resting calmly on a sealed leather document case, while the other remained tucked inside her pocket. Around her, the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago hummed with quiet power. Lawyers hurried past carrying stacks of files. Reporters whispered near the elevators. Bailiffs moved with the stiff confidence of people used to controlling rooms. But at exactly 9:12 that morning, every eye shifted toward the tall black woman standing in front of the courtroom doors while Officer Grant Holloway blocked her path like she didn't belong there. His badge glinted under the ceiling lights. His jaw tightened as he looked her up and down, taking in her plain clothes, her natural curls, her lack of jewelry. To him, she didn't look like someone connected to a multi-million-dollar legal hearing. She looked like a problem. "You heard me," Grant said again, louder this time. "This hearing is restricted access." Naomi's expression never changed. "I'm aware," she answered quietly. Her calm somehow made him more irritated. People nearby slowed down now, pretending to check phones while listening closely. A white woman in a navy suit standing near the security desk leaned toward another clerk and smirked. "She probably thinks this is traffic court," she whispered. Naomi heard every word. She'd heard versions of it her entire life. At 19, she'd watched courthouse security force her mother to wait outside a legal office for nearly 3 hours because they assumed she was there asking for public assistance instead of meeting an attorney. At 27, Naomi herself had been stopped outside a corporate arbitration hearing and mistaken for catering staff while carrying the merger documents that eventually made her company millions. Same buildings, same polished floors, same assumptions. Only now, the stakes were much higher. Officer Grant stepped closer. Identification. Naomi slowly reached into her coat pocket and handed him a black credential card. He barely glanced at it before scoffing. "This doesn't give you clearance." "Look again," Naomi replied. Before he could answer, the heavy courtroom doors opened briefly and voices spilled into the hallway. Inside, one of the most controversial property seizure hearings in Illinois was already beginning. A powerful development group was attempting to take ownership of an entire South Side neighborhood through legal loopholes buried inside fraudulent contracts. Families were about to lose homes they'd owned for generations. And Naomi Whitaker had walked into that courthouse carrying the one document capable of destroying the entire case. But nobody there knew that yet. Grant handed the credential back like it annoyed him to touch it. "Ma'am, I don't know who told you to come down here, but you are not authorized to interrupt federal proceedings." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Interrupt?" she repeated softly. "No, officer. I'm here to end them." The hallway went still. Somewhere behind the security scanners, someone muttered, "Damn." Grant laughed under his breath, the kind of laugh people use when they think humiliation is entertainment. "You people always think saying something dramatic changes reality." Naomi's eyes locked onto his. Cold, steady, unmoved. "Reality changes the second truth enters the room," she said. And for the first time that morning, Officer Grant Holloway stopped smiling. Officer Grant Holloway stared at Naomi Whitaker for another long second before stepping directly in front of the courtroom doors again, widening his stance as if his body alone could keep her out. The hallway lights reflected against the polished marble walls, turning the federal courthouse cold and metallic. Around them, conversations had slowed into whispers. A young reporter near the elevators lowered her coffee cup. Two attorneys stopped pretending not to watch. Even the metal detector officer at the front entrance glanced over now, sensing the tension thickening in the air. Naomi adjusted the leather document case beneath her arm with calm precision. No trembling hands, no raised voice, just stillness. The kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable when they expected fear. Officer Grant folded his arms. "Let me guess," he said. "Some activist group sent you down here to make a scene." Naomi looked past him toward the courtroom doors. "No one sent me." "Then you are trespassing near a restricted federal hearing." "Am I?" she asked quietly. Grant exhaled sharply through his nose. He was used to people backing down once authority entered the conversation. Most people lowered their eyes. Most people apologized. Naomi didn't either. and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit. A woman standing near the clerk station leaned closer to another employee. "She does not even look like a lawyer," she whispered. Naomi heard that too. She heard all of it. She always had. 15 years earlier, before the magazine covers, before the billion-dollar acquisitions, before financial networks started calling her one of the most influential real estate executives in America, Naomi Whitaker used to sit alone inside county records offices reading property filings for hours at a time because nobody would hire a young black woman to negotiate major land deals. Men in suits walked past her every day assuming she was someone's assistant. One banker once handed her his empty coffee cup without even looking at her face. Naomi never forgot moments like that. She studied them, stored them, built empires on top of them. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we are glad you are here. Now, back to Naomi. Inside courtroom 7B, voices suddenly rose louder. Judge Richard Bellamy had begun questioning witnesses connected to the South Haven redevelopment seizure case, a legal battle already drawing national criticism after dozens of low-income homeowners claimed their signatures had been forged on property transfer documents. Naomi knew every detail of that case because 6 months earlier, a whistleblower from Bellamy's own legal network had quietly delivered evidence straight into Whitaker Global Holdings. At first, Naomi thought it was simple fraud. Then she saw the payment trails. Shell companies, altered deeds, quiet wire transfers routed through fake consulting firms. The deeper she looked, the uglier it became. Entire families had been pushed toward foreclosure while powerful developers made millions behind closed courtroom doors. And now, standing between Naomi and the truth entering that room, was a courthouse officer who still thought she was just another black woman in the wrong hallway. Grant pointed toward the elevators. "Last warning. Walk away before I make this difficult." Naomi slowly turned her eyes back toward him. "Difficult," she repeated softly. "Officer, difficult is watching families lose homes while people inside that courtroom profit from it." Grant laughed under his breath again, but this time it sounded thinner, less confident. "You really think one folder changes anything?" Naomi's grip tightened slightly around the document case. "No," she said calmly. "But this one destroys everything." Officer Grant Holloway's face tightened the moment Naomi Whitaker finished speaking. The confidence he wore like armor was beginning to crack around the edges, but pride still held him upright. He glanced toward the courtroom doors again, as if hoping someone more important would appear and remove this problem for him. Instead, the hallway only grew more crowded. Reporters lingered near the walls pretending to scroll through emails while quietly recording audio on their phones. 2 courthouse interns whispered near the security checkpoint. Even the older janitor polishing brass rails nearby had stopped working completely. Everyone sensed something shifting. Naomi remained perfectly still beneath the pale courthouse lights, the sealed leather case resting against her side like it belonged there more than anyone else in that building. Grant pointed toward the scanners near the entrance. "You know what your problem is?" he asked. "You walk in here acting entitled." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. Entitled to what? Access, authority, respect. The word respect hung between them like smoke. Naomi let silence answer first. That silence unsettled him more than an argument would have. Because deep down, Officer Grant Holloway already knew something was off about this situation. Most people threatened by courthouse security became emotional. They defended themselves too hard. They panicked. Naomi did not. She looked at him the same way senior executives looked at failing employees during final meetings. Calm, certain, finished. A sharp voice suddenly cut through the hallway. "Grant, what is taking so long?" Marissa Lane stepped out from a side office carrying a digital tablet against her chest. Early 40s. Blonde hair pulled tight. Navy blazer perfectly pressed. She worked as courtroom administrative supervisor under Judge Bellamy and carried herself with the smug efficiency of someone who believed proximity to power made her untouchable. Her eyes landed on Naomi for less than 2 seconds before judgment settled across her face. "Oh," she muttered. "Another disruption." Grant exhaled with relief like backup had finally arrived. "She claims she has authorization connected to the hearing." Marissa laughed softly under her breath. "Claims." Naomi studied her quietly. Marissa stepped closer, heels clicking sharply against marble floors. "Listen carefully," she said. "Important people are inside that courtroom right now. Investors, attorneys, state officials. We cannot have random individuals wandering federal hallways carrying mystery folders." Random individuals. Naomi had heard cleaner versions of that phrase in boardrooms for years. At 32, she once attended a private banking summit in Manhattan, where hotel staff repeatedly asked if she was part of the catering crew despite the fact her company sponsored the event. One executive actually complimented her professionalism while handing her his coat. Naomi remembered smiling politely while buying controlling interest in his real estate portfolio 6 months later. Some people never realized how expensive their assumptions could become. Marissa folded her arms now, lowering her voice slightly. "You should leave before this becomes embarrassing." Naomi tilted her head. "Embarrassing for who?" Grant smirked again, gaining confidence from Marissa's presence. "You heard her." Then he reached toward the leather document case. "Give me the folder." Naomi's hand tightened immediately. Not fear. Protection. Around them, the air shifted. Even the reporters stopped pretending not to listen. Grant extended his hand farther. "Federal security protocol." Naomi did not move. "You do not have clearance to touch what is inside this case." Marissa rolled her eyes dramatically. "What exactly do you think is in there?" "Some secret government file." Naomi finally looked directly at her. Cold. Measured. Precise. "No," she said quietly. "Something much more dangerous." Grant's jaw flexed. "Open it now." Naomi's voice stayed calm enough to cut glass. "The second this case opens," she said, "your entire courthouse changes." The hallway outside courtroom 7B no longer felt like part of a federal building. It felt like pressure sealed inside glass, waiting for the first crack. Officer Grant Holloway stood rigid beside Naomi Whitaker, one hand hovering near the leather document case, while Marissa Lane watched with growing irritation. Every passing second seemed to make the crowd thicker. Reporters drifted closer under the excuse of checking schedules. Clerks paused near office doors. Even attorneys inside nearby courtrooms peeked into the hallway after hearing voices rise. But inside courtroom 7B itself, the hearing had already begun moving exactly the way powerful people intended. Judge Richard Bellamy sat high above the courtroom in black robes, calm and polished beneath the seal of the United States District Court. To anyone watching casually, he looked like authority personified. Controlled. Experienced. Fair. But Naomi knew better. Down below him, members of the South Haven families sat squeezed together in the wooden gallery benches, exhausted faces tight with anxiety. Elderly homeowners clutched faded folders filled with mortgage papers and handwritten notes. One woman quietly wiped tears with trembling fingers, while attorneys representing Kingston Urban Development argued that the residents no longer had legal ownership of their own properties due to administrative transfer complications. Administrative transfer complications. That was the language corruption loved most. Clean words hiding ugly theft. At the plaintiff table sat Daniel Mercer, lead counsel for Kingston Urban Development. Expensive gray suit pressed perfectly, silver watch glinting beneath courtroom lights. He spoke with the smooth confidence of a man who believed outcomes had already been purchased before arguments even started. "Your Honor," Mercer said calmly, "these redevelopment agreements were processed legally through approved channels." Naomi nearly smiled hearing that sentence through the partially opened courtroom doors. Approved channels. She knew exactly which channels he meant. Offshore accounts disguised as consulting payments. Fraudulent title transfers hidden through shell companies in Delaware. Wire transfers routed through nonprofit housing agencies that existed only on paper. Judge Bellamy leaned back slightly in his chair, fingers steepled together. "And there is no evidence of coercion?" Mercer shook his head smoothly. "None whatsoever." Several residents in the gallery murmured in frustration, but the judge immediately struck his gavel once. "Order." The sound echoed sharply into the hallway. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. That sound brought back memories she hated. At 16 years old, she sat beside her mother in housing court, while a judge barely looked at them before approving an eviction order tied to paperwork they did not even understand. Naomi still remembered her mother's face afterward. Not anger, not panic, just humiliation. The humiliation of realizing systems built to protect people often protected power instead. That memory never left her. It sharpened her. Built her. Now here she stood years later outside another courtroom, watching another group of families being quietly erased through polished legal language and confident lies. Marissa crossed her arms tighter. "Whatever stunt you think this is," she muttered, "you are interrupting a federal proceeding." Naomi opened her eyes slowly. "No," she answered softly. "I am interrupting corruption." Grant scoffed loudly. Big accusation coming from someone standing outside the courtroom. Naomi turned toward him fully now. "I am outside because people inside are terrified of what happens when I walk in." Before Grant could answer, a young man carrying courthouse files suddenly emerged from the courtroom doors. Mid-20s, thin build, nervous eyes behind rectangular glasses. His name badge read Evan Brooks. He stopped the moment he saw Naomi standing there with the leather case. Then his expression changed instantly. Recognition. Real recognition. His eyes locked directly onto the embossed federal seal pressed into the corner of Naomi's document case. And suddenly the color drained from his face. Evan Brooks froze in the middle of the hallway with courthouse files pressed tightly against his chest. His eyes remained fixed on the leather case in Naomi Whitaker's hand, specifically the dark blue seal stamped into the lower corner. He recognized it immediately because 3 weeks earlier he had been instructed never to mention it again. The hallway noise seemed to dull around him. Officer Grant Holloway noticed the shift first. "What?" Grant snapped. Evan swallowed hard. "Nothing." But it was not nothing. Naomi watched the young clerk carefully. Nervous hands. Uneven breathing. The look of someone standing too close to a truth they were never supposed to see. Marissa Lane stepped toward him sharply. "Evan, get back inside the courtroom." He did not move. His eyes drifted back toward the document case again. Naomi spoke quietly for the first time directly to him. "You know what this is." It was not a question. Evan's jaw tightened. "I should not be talking out here." Marissa immediately cut in. "Correct. You should not." The tension in her voice sharpened instantly, and that alone told Naomi everything she needed to know. Grant looked between them with growing confusion. "Somebody want to explain what is happening?" Evan hesitated another second before finally lowering his voice. "That seal is connected to a federal oversight review." Silence crashed into the hallway. One reporter near the elevators slowly lowered her phone from her ear. Another quietly started recording video. Marissa's face lost color for half a second before anger rushed back into replace. Evan," she warned. "Enough." But the young clerk could not stop staring at Naomi, because now he understood exactly why she was there. Months earlier, Evan accidentally discovered accounting irregularities buried inside internal courthouse filing systems while organizing digital exhibits tied to the South Haven redevelopment case. At first, he assumed it was clerical error. Then he found duplicate wire transfers linked to shell corporations with no operating addresses. Then came sealed judicial authorizations signed faster than legally possible. Every trail led back toward Judge Bellamy's courtroom. Evan reported it quietly to his supervisor. 2 days later, he was reassigned to basement archive duty and warned not to ask questions again if he valued his career. Since then, he had lived with the suffocating feeling that something rotten sat at the center of that courthouse. And now Naomi Whitaker had just walked in carrying proof. Grant scoffed loudly, trying to reclaim control of the situation. "So what? That still does not give her access." Naomi calmly turned toward him. "You still think access is the issue here?" Marissa stepped forward quickly before Evan could speak again. "Officer Holloway, remove her from the hallway immediately." Her voice carried panic now beneath the authority. Real panic. Grant nodded instantly. Gladly. He reached toward Naomi's arm. The movement was fast, automatic, practiced. But Naomi stepped back once. Clean. Controlled. The air around them tightened instantly. Several people gasped softly. A courthouse deputy near the elevators started walking closer. Naomi's eyes never left Grant's face. "Do not mistake restraint for weakness," she said quietly. Grant squared his shoulders. "Ma'am, you are interfering with federal operations." Naomi almost smiled hearing that phrase. Interfering with federal operations. 20 years earlier, her father heard nearly identical words after trying to challenge an illegal property tax seizure against his small grocery store on Chicago's South Side. They buried him in paperwork until he gave up. Naomi remembered watching him come home exhausted every night, realizing systems did not always crush people through force. Sometimes they crushed people through procedure. through humiliation, through exhaustion. That memory hardened inside her long ago into something stronger than anger. Marissa pointed toward the elevators now. Last chance. Leave voluntarily. Naomi slowly looked past her through the courtroom doors where Judge Bellamy continued speaking calmly from the bench, while families inside sat seconds away from losing everything. Then she looked back at Marissa. You already know I am not leaving. Evan suddenly stepped forward again before fear could stop him. His voice shook, but it carried clearly through the hallway. She is telling the truth. Every head turned toward him. Grant blinked. Excuse me. Evan swallowed hard. If that document is what I think it is, he said carefully, then this hearing should not even be happening. The hallway outside courtroom 7B went completely silent after Evan Brooks spoke. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that spreads when truth accidentally enters a room full of people trying to avoid it. Officer Grant Holloway stared at Evan like he had just committed career suicide. Marissa Lane's face hardened instantly. Evan, she snapped sharply, you are out of line. But the young clerk was already breathing too fast now, trapped between fear and conscience. He glanced toward Naomi Whitaker again, then toward the courtroom doors where Judge Bellamy continued speaking inside, as if nothing dangerous was happening beyond those walls. Naomi recognized that look in Evan immediately. The look of someone exhausted from pretending not to see corruption. She had seen it on bankers before federal raids, on accountants before congressional investigations, on junior executives moments before whistleblower lawsuits exploded across headlines. People always reached a breaking point eventually. The hallway lights seemed harsher now, reflecting across polished marble floors while more courthouse staff slowly drifted closer pretending they had reasons to be nearby. One reporter quietly whispered into her phone. Something major is happening outside Bellamy's courtroom. Marissa stepped directly in front of Evan. You need to stop talking right now. Evan swallowed hard. Ma'am, if that case contains federal oversight authorization, then Judge Bellamy should have been notified before proceedings started. Grant immediately cut in. You do not know what is in that folder. Naomi finally answered herself. Actually, she said calmly, he does. Marissa turned toward Naomi sharply. Enough. But her voice lacked the confidence it carried earlier. Tiny cracks had started spreading through the control she thought she had. Naomi watched it happen in real time. Fear replacing arrogance one layer at a time. Grant stepped closer again, lowering his voice like intimidation worked better in private. Listen carefully, he muttered. I do not care who you think you are. You are disrupting federal court operations, and I can remove you from this floor immediately. Naomi's expression never changed. You still think this building belongs to people like you? Grant frowned. What does that mean? Naomi looked around the hallway slowly. At the courthouse staff avoiding eye contact. At the frightened families inside the courtroom waiting for decisions already tilted against them. At the reporters sensing a story larger than they first realized. Then back at him. It means systems like this were never designed to expect someone like me walking in with proof. Marissa crossed her arms tighter. Proof of what? Naomi's voice stayed steady enough to slice through the air. Proof that this hearing was compromised before it ever began. The words hit like a power outage. Several people nearby exchanged stunned looks immediately. Inside the courtroom, Judge Bellamy's voice echoed faintly through the doors while attorneys continued arguing property transfers worth millions of dollars. But outside, reality had already started changing. Evan lowered his voice again carefully. I saw irregular filings connected to this case months ago. Marissa spun toward him instantly. You signed confidentiality agreements. I also signed ethics certifications, Evan answered quietly. Grant shook his head in disbelief. You are really throwing away your career over this? Evan looked toward Naomi one more time. Maybe she is. The first person who actually came back for the truth. Naomi felt something tighten briefly in her chest hearing that sentence. Because at 21 years old, she once promised herself something after watching her father lose his grocery store to fraudulent zoning manipulation protected by city officials who never faced consequences. If she ever gained enough power, she would stop walking away from rooms designed to silence people like her. That promise built Whitaker Global Holdings. It built every acquisition, every investigation, every quiet move that eventually led her right here. Marissa suddenly pointed toward courthouse security near the elevators. Call Judicial Protection Services now. Grant nodded immediately and reached toward his radio. But before he could press it, Naomi slowly lifted her phone and made a single comm call. "Caroline," she said quietly, "activate Protocol 7. The woman on the other end answered instantly. "Already done. Federal oversight agents are entering the building now." For the first time all morning, Officer Grant Holloway looked afraid. Officer Grant Holloway lowered his radio slowly, but the damage was already done. The moment Naomi Whitaker mentioned federal oversight agents entering the building, the energy inside the courthouse shifted completely. Not loudly, quietly, like pressure changing before a storm. Marissa Lane took a small step backward without realizing she had moved at all. Evan Brooks stared at Naomi with wide eyes, somewhere between fear and relief. And through the heavy courtroom doors, Judge Richard Bellamy continued conducting the South Haven hearing, completely unaware that his control over the room was evaporating by the second. Naomi adjusted the leather document case beneath her arm and finally stepped forward. This time, Grant did not block her immediately. That hesitation alone changed everything. People noticed. Power always revealed itself most clearly in moments of hesitation. A reporter near the elevators whispered into her phone, "She is walking in." Another lifted a camera higher. The courthouse hallway no longer belonged to security officers or administrators. It belonged to the truth. Trying to enter the room, Marissa recovered first. "You cannot walk into an active federal hearing without judicial approval." Naomi looked directly at her. "I already have federal authorization." Then she reached into the inside pocket of her coat and removed a folded document stamped with the seal of the Department of Justice. Grant's face drained immediately the second he saw it. Marissa tried to speak, but nothing came out. Naomi handed the authorization directly to Evan. "Read the final line." Evan unfolded the document carefully with shaking hands. His voice cracked slightly as he read aloud. "Emergency authority granted for immediate presentation of evidence connected to suspected judicial misconduct, property fraud, and obstruction of federal oversight." Silence swallowed the hallway whole. Even the courthouse deputy near the elevators stopped moving. Marissa's lips parted slowly. "No," she whispered under her breath. But Naomi was already walking toward the courtroom doors. Grant stepped forward one final time out of instinct more than confidence. "Wait." Naomi stopped. The hallway froze with her. Grant looked at her carefully now for the first time all morning, not like a disruption, not like an inconvenience, but like someone he had completely misjudged. "Who are you?" he finally asked quietly. Naomi's eyes held his for one long second. "The woman you tried to remove from a courtroom I financed." Grant blinked hard. Marissa stared at her in disbelief. Naomi continued calmly. "Whitaker Global Holdings funded the Federal Housing Protection Initiative tied to this entire investigation." The words landed like falling concrete. Evan's eyes widened instantly. He knew that name. Everybody in Chicago real estate knew that name. Whitaker Global Holdings owned billions in commercial and residential assets across the country. Naomi Whitaker was not simply wealthy. She was one of the most influential development executives in America. And Officer Grant Holloway had spent the last 30 minutes threatening her in front of half the courthouse because she did not look like the version of power he expected. Naomi slowly took the leather case into both hands now. "You threatened the wrong woman in the wrong courthouse," she said quietly. Then she pushed open the courtroom doors. The hearing inside stopped almost instantly. Judge Bellamy looked up from the bench with irritation already forming across his face. Attorneys turned sharply. Families in the gallery shifted in confusion. Naomi walked down the center aisle slowly beneath the courtroom lights, while every eye followed her. Calm, controlled, unshaken. Daniel Mercer frowned immediately. "Your Honor, this hearing is restricted." Naomi ignored him completely. She stopped directly before the bench and placed the leather case onto the evidence table with measured precision. Judge Bellamy narrowed his eyes. "Ma'am, identify yourself." Naomi opened the case. Inside sat sealed financial records, federal warrants, transaction reports, judicial authorizations, and internal communications tied directly to the South Haven fraud operation. Then she looked up at the bench. "Naomi Whitaker," she said evenly. "And this hearing is over." The courtroom stopped breathing the moment Naomi Whitaker opened the leather case. Judge Richard Bellamy stared down from the bench with visible irritation at first, But that expression vanished almost immediately when he recognized the federal seals stamped across the documents spread before him. The room shifted all at once. Attorneys leaned forward. Reporters rushed through the courtroom doors behind Naomi, phones already raised. Families seated in the gallery exchanged confused looks as tension spread row by row like electricity through water. Daniel Mercer stood up too quickly from the plaintiff table, nearly knocking over his chair. "Your Honor, this is highly inappropriate," he snapped. Naomi calmly slid a stack of financial records across the evidence table without even looking at him. "So is laundering redevelopment money through shell corporations tied to judicial intermediaries." The words detonated across the courtroom. Gasps broke out immediately from the gallery benches. One elderly homeowner covered her mouth with both hands. Another man whispered, "I knew it." Judge Bellamy struck his gavel once. Hard. Order. But even his voice sounded thinner now, less certain. Naomi lifted another document slowly. Wire transfers routed through Bellamy Civic Consulting Group. Another file followed. Property deed modifications approved before legal review. Another. Private communications between Kingston Urban Development and courthouse administrators discussing accelerated seizure schedules. Daniel Mercer's face turned pale beneath the courtroom lights. "This is fabricated." Naomi finally looked directly at him for the first time. Federal forensic accountants disagree. The silence afterward felt massive. Officer Grant Holloway stood frozen near the courtroom entrance beside Marissa Lane, both suddenly looking very small compared to the collapse unfolding in front of them. Grant's eyes drifted slowly across the room, realizing every threat he made earlier now existed in front of witnesses, reporters, federal oversight authorization, and courthouse staff who could no longer pretend they saw nothing. Marissa's breathing quickened visibly. Evan Brooks remained near the doors, gripping courthouse files tightly against his chest while watching years of hidden corruption unravel in real time. Judge Bellamy tried to regain control. "Miss Whitaker, you are interrupting active proceedings with unverified allegations." Naomi reached into the case again and removed one final sealed envelope. "No," she answered quietly. "I am ending them with verified evidence." She handed the envelope directly to the bailiff standing below the bench. The man hesitated only briefly before delivering it upward. Bellamy opened it slowly. Then the color disappeared from his face entirely. Inside sat federal authorization orders signed that morning approving immediate suspension of all proceedings connected to the South Haven redevelopment case, pending criminal investigation into judicial misconduct, fraud, and obstruction. Bellamy's hand visibly trembled holding the papers. For the first time in years, the powerful judge looked human. Not untouchable. Human. Reporters immediately flooded toward the courtroom, all whispering into cameras and phones. One woman near the back said loudly, "This is going national." Daniel Mercer started gathering his documents rapidly, like movement alone could help him escape what was happening. Naomi watched him calmly. "You build families into foreclosure while executives purchased vacation homes with stolen redevelopment money." Mercer pointed at her angrily. "You have no right to accuse me in this courtroom." Naomi's voice stayed level. "Actually, I financed the investigation that brought federal oversight into this building." That sentence shattered whatever control remained. Families in the gallery began standing slowly one by one, some crying quietly, some simply staring in disbelief. One older woman who had nearly lost her home pressed both hands over her face and whispered, "Thank you." Near the courtroom entrance, two federal oversight agents finally entered wearing dark suits and silver identification badges. The entire room turned toward them instantly. One agent approached the bench directly. "Judge Bellamy," he said evenly, "this hearing is suspended effective immediately." The second agent turned toward courthouse administrators near the wall. "No one leaves the courtroom." Marissa Lane nearly stumbled backward hearing that. Officer Grant Holloway lowered his eyes completely for the first time all morning. And in the center of the courtroom, Naomi Whitaker stood perfectly calm while the entire corrupt system around her began collapsing under the weight of the truth. The federal courtroom no longer sounded like a place where verdicts were handed down. It sounded like a system waking up after years of silence. Reporters crowded the aisles, speaking rapidly into cameras while courthouse staff whispered in stunned disbelief near the walls. Judge Richard Bellamy remained frozen behind the bench, federal suspension orders still trembling slightly in his hands. Daniel Mercer sat motionless now, the confidence that once filled his expensive suit completely gone. The South Haven families stood together near the gallery benches watching the people who nearly erased their lives finally lose control of the room. And at the center of it all stood Naomi Whitaker, calm as stone beneath the courtroom lights. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply watched the truth settle over everyone like gravity. Federal oversight agents moved quietly through the courtroom collecting documents and speaking with courthouse personnel. One agent approached Marissa Lane near the wall. "We need access to all administrative communications tied to this hearing." Marissa nodded weakly without speaking. Earlier that morning, she carried herself like someone protected by the building around her. Now she looked like someone realizing buildings could collapse too. Near the courtroom entrance, Officer Grant Holloway remained perfectly still. His posture had changed completely. The authority was gone. So was the arrogance. In its place sat something heavier. Shame. Naomi noticed him standing there and slowly walked toward the back of the courtroom while conversations lowered around her. Grant lifted his eyes carefully when she approached. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The courthouse around them continued moving in fragments. Reporters rushing, lawyers whispering, agents documenting evidence. But inside that small space near the courtroom doors, everything felt still again. Grant swallowed hard. "I did not know who you were." Naomi looked at him quietly. That was never the real problem. His eyes lowered again, because deep down he understood exactly what she meant. If Naomi Whitaker had looked different that morning, dressed different, spoken different, walked in beside powerful white attorneys instead of alone, none of this would have happened. She would have been welcomed instead of threatened, respected instead of questioned. Grant exhaled slowly. "I thought I was protecting the court." Naomi's voice remained calm. "No, you were protecting your idea of who belongs inside it." The words landed softly, but they hit harder than shouting ever could. Grant had no response. Nearby, Evan Brooks stepped out into the hallway holding a small stack of recovered files. The young clerk looked exhausted, but lighter somehow, like someone finally able to breathe after holding tension inside for too long. Naomi turned toward him. "You did the right thing." Evan shook his head slightly. "I almost stayed quiet." Naomi nodded. "Once. Most people do." She understood that better than anyone. Systems like this survived because silence became safer than truth. She learned that lesson young. At 12 years old, she watched her father walk out of city offices carrying rejection letters tied to permits he should have received. At 16, she watched her mother treated like she was invisible inside courtrooms built to serve justice. At 28, she sat inside corporate meetings where executives complimented her intelligence while quietly excluding her from decisions they assumed she could not understand. Every moment taught her the same thing. The world often confused dignity with weakness until power forced it to pay attention. One of the elderly South Haven homeowners slowly approached Naomi now, tears still visible in her eyes. "You saved our homes," she whispered. Naomi gently shook her head. "No," she answered softly. "The truth did that." Reporters immediately raised cameras again after hearing her speak. Flashes reflected against marble walls while courthouse noise swelled around them. But Naomi Whitaker remained perfectly composed. Then she looked once more across the courtroom where corruption had ruled only an hour earlier and spoke the words that stayed with everyone who heard them long after that day ended. "I did not raise my voice," she said calmly. "I raised the standard."